Well, good afternoon, and thank you for attending the webinar on negative reviews and trademarks. Thank you to Bron and Carolyn for having me on this webinar today. It is a privilege and a joy to be able to present to people from such a far, wide and broad audience. Now, we're talking on two topics today, both what to do about negative reviews when they happen, and also a bit of a 101 about trademarks. Very, very basic and straightforward, but hopefully it will give you a good basic idea of what a trademark is and why you need it. So today's webinars and the notes that you can see on the screen are not designed to be legal advice. If you do need legal advice, please contact me and I can consider your specific circumstances further, and we can work out any issues that you might have from there. So firstly, we'll just have a little bit of a talk about the digital economy. So having an online presence and being accessible through online platforms opens you up to customers worldwide and is essential in today's digital world. The digital economy has been built on ratings and reviews to enable people to window shop online. With that presence comes the benefits of allowing happy customers to share their great experiences. However, it is no longer easy to pick and choose which reviews and testimonials are posted. It only takes one disgruntled former client or customer, or sometimes an employee, to ruin a good reputation by posting a negative review. No matter how false or misleading that review might be, such negative reviews can quickly be widely distributed and have immediate repercussions for your business. What is published online is often not intended to be malicious, but is someone's honestly held opinion. In these circumstances, if a comment is substantially true or represents the honestly held opinion of the reviewer, then a business will have difficulty in bringing a successful defamation claim but may have other legal remedies. An immediate and pragmatic response to the review is often the most effective way to counteract its negative effects. The law in Australia at the moment is quite complex, and there are three areas of the law that can be relevant in dealing with negative online reviews. The Defamation Act 2005, the Australian Consumer Law, and the common law tort of injurious falsehood, which is not very well known and not often used, are all applicable. Under the Defamation Act, businesses with fewer than 10 employees may take legal action against writers on negative online reviews if the comments are defamatory. The basic requirements to establish defamation would be that the review must damage the person or small business's reputation in the eyes of the public. The review must have been published to at least one other person, not including the defamed person. The defamed person or business must be identifiable from the review. So they've got to be able to tell that it's you through the review. You can't just sort of infer that you think it was about you. In addition, you must be able to prove that the published review was not the honest opinion of the writer, or that the writer was acting maliciously. There must be an intention to cause damage to the reputation of the person or business being defamed. So it is quite a high bar, and sometimes a defamation case can perpetuate the bad review or the defamatory comments that are made. So it's something that needs to be considered very carefully, and the advantages and disadvantages of going through a defamation court case need to be considered very carefully. Under the Australian Consumer Law, Section 18 protects against conduct that is misleading, deceptive, or likely to mislead. This negates that requirement to prove malice and actual damage. However, this remedy will not be available in all circumstances. Certain business-to-business transactions do not come under the consumer law. The consumer law is generally designed to protect everyday consumers and not necessarily business transactions. The tort of injurious falsehood is comprised of a false statement, which would be the review, either oral or in writing, made to a third person, which is maliciously made or made knowing that it is false, is intended to injure property, products or businesses of the business or person who the comment is about, is likely to cause damage to the person or business whom it is about, and causes actual financial loss to the person or business whom it is about. Now, I've prepared a step-by-step summary of my suggestion on how to deal with negative reviews. This is purely my suggestion, and there are different ways to take steps to negate the effects of a negative review. So if you do believe that your business has been a victim of unfair, untrue or defamatory remarks as a result of an online review, you should act quickly to minimise the damage. The following strategy is designed to help minimise damage and hopefully avoid costs of a legal proceedings. So step number 1 would be to try and remove it. Contact the website which has published the review, explain the circumstances and falsity of the review, ask that the review be removed on the basis that it is false, misleading and likely to cause you significant damage. Now, I've had clients who have had success in having negative reviews removed if they can show that it is false. However, sometimes negative reviews won't be removed. The website holders feel that, it's their duty to hold and publish the negative reviews as much as it is the positive reviews. So that can be a little bit hit and miss. Step number 2 would be to contact the customer who has left the review and try to resolve the issue that has arisen. Once resolved, and if you can resolve it, request that the customer remove the review or write a further positive review about the way the issue has been handled and the service product received. If you can overcome the hurdle, then I believe that it shows that you have good customer service, and I think the public would respond well to seeing that an issue that has arisen has been dealt with properly. Step number 3 would be to write a short online response to the review, addressing the issue if possible, and informing the public that the reviewer's comments are either unfounded or unfortunate and have been addressed. I don't think that any sort of response should be lengthy. I don't think it should be detailed. I think it should be very brief and very factual. You don't want to enter into an online debate with someone leaving negative reviews, because again, that can perpetuate the negative review. Updating your website or your blog, publish an article, run a promotion, launch a new product, do something that will create online hype and chatter, and will hopefully bury the negative review under new positive reviews and announcements. If you can create a situation where more people are reviewing your product or your services online, then the negative review will move down the line. Now, I often tell clients that family and friends can be very useful here, or customers who are happy with your services, and a lot of the time they'll be happy to oblige with going online and posting some more reviews. Now, step number 4 would be to seek legal advice. It is important to seek legal advice if you feel that the comments are defamatory, misleading, untrue, and are causing you damage. It might be a situation where you need to contact the authorities, such as fair trading or the police, or take further legal actions under the civil law, such as the consumer laws, or under tort. I had a client who negative reviews were left as a way of getting around paying their bills. And my client and I went to the police because it was false, it was fraudulent, and it was in many ways theft because they owed money for certain products and services. That did help because the police contacted the customer, and the customer soon woke up to themselves and paid their bill. So moving on from negative online reviews, trademarks. Now this is a basic
Can
out.
I sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. Can I
no,
talk
absolutely.
about some of those issues? That was a really interesting scenario that you brought through there about. So, are you saying it was a supplier, someone who stayed at the hotel that was leaving those negative reviews so they didn't have to pay the bill, or
It
was it
wasn't
a
a hotel.
plumber?
No, it wasn't a hotel. It was actually an osteopath.
Yes.
And the osteopath had provided services and
Yep.
provided some goods along with the services.
Yep.
And the client turned around and said, "Oh, I don't have the money. I'll just pop down the road and get the cash, and I'll come back
Yep.
and I'll provide the money," and never came back with the money. And instead of
Right.
coming back with the money, went online and left negative reviews,
Yep.
really hostile,
Yeah.
false reviews. And
Yep.
so we took all three steps. We tried to get it removed. We posted a response. We went to the police, who also contacted the client, and we created the online chatter to try and bury what both the online review and the response, because you don't really want people seeing that as up front.
Yeah, and is that seriously an avenue that you would recommend, um, an accommodation provider or tour operator take? If you know for a fact, because I know there's somebody on this sitting on this webinar who has an issue where a competitor up the road puts false reviews on a regular basis, because they're sort of rebranding, they're improving their business.
Mm.
So can like they're not quite sure that it's that person though. So
Mm.
what do you do from there?
You do need to know who it is.
Yeah,
You don't want to be making false allegations of any
yeah,
kind, because that can be serious as well.
of course, yeah, of
If you
course.
do have proof that someone has done something malicious against you and then it's causing you damage,
Yes,
you can contact the authority. There are ombudsmen and fair trading.
yeah,
Some of those authorities can take certain action against a business
yeah,
if what it's doing is against the regulations.
yeah,
In relation to the police will get involved more if it's uh, sort of there's money involved, and you can assert sort of fraud and theft and those sort of criminal activities
yeah.
more than anything else.
Okay, and
Alyssa, if I
another,
might just add to what you said about responding, there is a lot of evidence that responding effectively to negative reviews is actually a powerful marketing tool, because your voice comes across as often the saner, more reflective voice. I think it would be nice if you can give an example of, I like your make it short, make it detailed, make it factual. If you could maybe suggest some classic type of wording responses. In the case of you suspect it's someone hostile saying, we're really surprised you didn't feed it back when you stay with us, but please contact us, tell us your dates, and we will seek to resolve it. And so I think there's short-term holding things you could do, but I think if you can give a suggested set of wording that kind of you've seen has worked would be great. And then Bron, I can tell you've got some more you wanted to add to that.
yeah. So
Yes. Look,
go on. Yep. Sorry, Alyssa.
I was just going to say, in relation to the wording, look, it's it's very circumstance based. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want
Okay.
to suggest any sort of wording that might not be appropriate in specific
Mm.
circumstances. So I think you've got to look at the situation and the person you're dealing with, and try to leave a response which is not going to enliven a debate.
Mm.
You simply
Yeah.
want to shut it down.
Uh,
Yeah. It's
I,
interesting.
I,
I've go on. Yep.
Go on, Bron. No, you go on, Bron.
I was just going to say, just on that, I'm planning a family holiday to Phuket at the moment, and I mean, Carolyn and I have got our heads in this space all the time because we actually use review sites as research. It gives us a really good barometer of where things are at for certain topics at the moment. And we're staying at a hotel called the Centara Seaview in Karalak, Phuket. So it's the Centara Seaview. I love the way that they reply to negative comments. So I would suggest go and have a look at those guys and just see how they respond. They respond in a really positive, factual manner. Everything's very factual, everything's very quite positive. There's no emotion in the responses. And I think that's really hard for a lot of us when we read things and we know the other side of the story. I always say to people, you know, you need to never respond on the same day. You need to walk around the block, come back, reflect, be factual, or, you know, just wait a few days to respond and take the emotion out of it. But the best responses to negative reviews have always been, as Alyssa says, very factual, without emotion. It's really, really important. And people will look at that and say, well, fair enough, people are reasonable. And we've run so many focus groups now where, you know, consumers and travellers are extremely savvy in picking through negative reviews, and we hear people say, oh, you always know when it's about the person that stayed there. They say this stuff in focus groups, so you know they're really quite well versed in deciphering what's real, what's not, and when it's about the actual traveller themselves. So Carolyn, what were you going to say about that?
Well,
as well?
I think to that point, Bron, sometimes your response to that can actually counterweight that. So that emotion, we do see people who've replied to responses, and I'm not going to name any guilty parties, but, you know, have a look at how people respond when you're looking at sites. The people who respond back in a very aggressive or angry manner, their angriness outweighs that ability to decode. So really, I just want to read back up what you said, Bron, which is take a walk around the block, get someone else to review it. I know certainly Bron and I, when we're posting reviews about businesses as well, we will read each other's reviews and say, have I got that completely fair? Have we responded constructively as reviewers? But I'd say it's
a recent experience.
We have a recent experience in this space, but I think it's really, really important to do that, because how you respond is a huge measure of that. And so those things about the factuality, but always take the emotion out of it and always respond in a way of, we want to sort this out, we want to be helpful. Probably the thing I would say in addition to that, based on our recent experience, is do make sure you read the review a couple of times. Because there's a negative review that's intended to be malicious, but I think the important thing, as Alyssa has said, is probably 9 out of 10 times it may not be malicious. And so have a listen to what they're saying and try and understand what their problem is before to solve it. Because in the case of Bron and I had recently a somewhat unhappy experience at an international hotel.
Shocker. It was a shocker.
We both said it was among our worst hotel experiences. We tried to post very constructive and reviews where we pointed out what the problem was, where we felt the hotel could solve it. Now the hotel came back and responded and said, great, we've had a word with front of house, to which I looked at it and said, well, that's quite nice, and that felt like a response to hold it. But anyone who read my review could see that I actually said the problem wasn't front of house, the problem was back of house, that the front of house staff weren't empowered. So basically, I think that that's a challenge, but I can definitely say that replying in any way that sounds hostile or defensive really does not help. It's exactly what Alyssa said. It gives oxygen to the complaint, because it says to people that perhaps that person's review, it validates that person's experience or point of view. So however hard it is to do that, do that. And I would take Bron's advice on going and having a look at the Centara in Phuket and seeing how they do it, because it's clear that in many cases what people are reacting to is there's a bit of a gap between expectation, but definitely take that time, review it, craft it very, very carefully, and always be thinking about it as a piece of marketing as well as a legal tool. Because if you do then need to do any legal response, anybody looking at this from the outside who's judging a situation is going to look at your tone of voice as well as the tone of voice of the other person. So it's both the smart thing to do in the short term as a marketing tool, but I think it's also the smart thing if you are going to progress this.
I'll just say something else on that. With the Centara Sea View, I also noted that it was the resort manager who responded personally to all reviews, and I think this is really an important point to consider. It's not really a junior's task to do this. I think when you're receiving negative reviews, do you really want, if it's your property, if you're managing the property, do you really want staff, well, I won't say not fully invested in property or the business? You really need to kind of, I guess, get someone fairly senior looking and responding to the reviews in a mature and experienced manner. I think that's really important, and that's what sprung to me. And her name's Karen. See, I've read, I like her already, and I like the responses to her reviews. So, yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out was that I have actually had a false negative review removed from Google. And this relates to a local business in Newtown where I live. So I knew these people. They said, Bronwyn, what can I do about, this person was not a customer. We know it. We've researched it. And we could actually, Google could see that it was a fake review. So there are avenues. If people, you're feeling despaired, you can actually get, I think it's a different story on TripAdvisor, but you can on Google My Business get reviews removed if you can fairly well prove that they did not buy something from you or stay or go on a tour. The interesting thing, Alyssa, I really found in some of that stuff you spoke about is proving it's not the honest view of the person in your legal world. How do we do that?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, look, if you can show that someone has made the comment and then acted contradictory to that comment, or that it's unlikely to have been their honest point of view based on the experience, then you might be able to prove it. Now, it's one of the issues that, that's one of the reasons that defamation cases are so difficult to win in court and are very expensive, is because a lot of it comes down to the evidence and the testimony of the witnesses and how believable they are, whether the court believes them or not. So, look, that's all very variable based on the evidence of the case.
And have you had any cases where it has been successful?
Yes. I mean, look, defamation cases are successful often. They're often not, and they often perpetuate the comments without creating any, without sort of creating a good outcome. But certainly if someone has made false and malicious comments, then you can prove that, and the court will award damages.
Yep, great. Okay, so we'll take questions at the end about that as well. So I just thought I'd sort of poke in and facilitate that a little bit. So we might move on to trademarks then. So over to you, yes. Alyssa.
All right. So trademarks. A lot of people just sort of ask, well, what is a trademark? How do I create a trademark which is beyond just the name of something? So to look at the definition of a trademark is a sign used or intended to be used to distinguish goods or services dealt with or provided in the course of trade by a person from goods or services so dealt with or provided by any other person. So the really important elements of a good trademark is it's got a recognizable association with the brand. So you think about Coca-Cola. People know what Coca-Cola is. I mean, it's not even the name of the company. Amatil's the name of the company, but Coca-Cola is so synonymous with what it is. And so it's very recognizable as associated with a specific brand and even a specific product. It needs to be distinctive of goods or services, but not descriptive. So there's a good court case, which is who is Australia's cheapest chemist. Is actually the name of the chemist. We find it in Bondi and a few other places, but it was held not to be trademarkable because it's descriptive. I've had several situations where clients come to me and say, I'd like to trademark either a catchphrase or their name, which is very descriptive. I've got an example further down, which is a client who created travel crates for animals had the slogan "Creation without compromise." Now that we tried to register that as a trademark, but it was found to not distinguish the goods, but also be descriptive of what they try and do, so it wasn't trademarkable. Another important element is that it has to be used in the course of trade. So you have to use your trademark. You can't just sort of stockpile trademarks. In some countries, the laws are different in relation to trademarks, but in Australia, you've got to be using or intending to use a trademark that you register within 3 years. And if you don't within those 3 years, it can be removed under Section 92 of the Act. Now, some of the common hurdles to registration of a trademark, as I said, commonly used phrases or descriptive terms make it difficult. It's got to be distinguishable for your goods, but not generally used by traders in that field. Geographical names and surnames can be very difficult to register. That said, I have registered Antcliffe, so it's not always impossible. And prohibited signs. There are certain signs that you can't use, especially signs considered to be rude or politically incorrect. Why register your trademark in Australia? You get a 10-year protection. Now, the registration establishes your legal right to take action against another party pursuant to the Trademarks Act. It increases brand awareness using a good trademark and helping to establish your brand under that trademark. Obviously creates brand awareness and helps people recognise your brand as distinguishable from other people's brands. Helps prevent other people using your trademarks without permission and encourages proper licensing of intellectual property. Now, this is important, otherwise other people would steal other people's trademarks all the time and simply use other people's trademarks. It's important that those laws are used and enforced. Adds value to your business if you have a strong IP rights. I do a lot of sale of businesses and purchases of businesses in my practice, and the IP rights are often one of the most valuable and important assets of a business. If you are going to sell it, people who buy businesses and buy companies usually want to rely on the intellectual property rights and the reputation of that business, and that's where they see the value a lot of the time. So if you decide not to register your trademark, you'll not be able to rely on the protection of the Trademarks Act, and you will have to rely on alternative legal action such as passing off under the common law and under the consumer laws. It's still an avenue, and certainly your legal remedies are not completely extinguished by not having a trademark. However, it's certainly more difficult. Now, defending your trademark is another very important aspect of trademarking. You need to maintain your trademark if you're going to have one. And to help prove your ownership of intellectual property and assist with preparation of submissions in support of trademarks, it's useful to keep a record of your trademarks. So the things that I suggest that all businesses and my clients maintain is a dossier of what kind of rights you have and in what form the rights to that intellectual property were created. Are you the owner of the intellectual property or a licensee? When the trademark was created? Who created the trademark? Evidence of ownership, such as an application for a trademark or a design. What, if any, material from a third party was used in the creation process, and whether permission for such use was obtained. So if you had someone else design or create a trademark for you, or you're using a trademark that someone else created and they said you could use. Logbooks showing how it was created and the process under which it was created. This is always very important if you've got employees creating any IP within a business. You need to be able to trace through the creation process and make sure that you hold those rights to that intellectual property. Also, any earlier drafts or prototypes of the trademark. A lot of the times trademarks evolve, the design evolves, and tracing through the earlier drafts of the trademark can help lengthen the intellectual property rights over a period of time, because a lot of the time the assessment of a trademark will look back at the priority of first use. So when a trademark was first created and used, and if you can show that a trademark has evolved from an earlier trademark rather than being newly created, it can extend those rights. Any copies of agreements are very important. So if you've got any licensing agreements, distribution agreements, which draws on those trademarks, uses of trademarks, relies on those trademarks, they're all very important. Well, that's the end of our talk about trademarks. I think there's a few examples, and I'm sure people have some questions. I'll hand it back to Bron.
Okay, thanks for that.
That's right.
Now, one of the reasons we thought trademarking would be a good idea is because I think a lot of us, the travel and tourism industry, if we're running a small business or just a business, think that if we have registered our business name and our website, we quite often think that we are protected. We think, well, I've got the business name, then I don't have to think about anything else. That is completely false. And the way we found this out is Carolyn has a bit of a sad story to tell about one of her previous businesses. So I'm going to hand over to her now. And it just goes to show you this sort of stuff can happen to anybody. But we're passionate about trademarks because we know there's so many small businesses within the travel and tourism industry with fairly unique and special names that if you haven't trademarked your name, you could be at risk of being sued if somebody else has trademarked that name, regardless if you hold the website or if you hold the business name. So I'll hand it over to you, Carolyn, to tell your story.
I wouldn't say, I mean, now I've moved on from being it said, I'd say it's probably a cautionary tale, and it's yes. Very, very interesting to me. Those of you who've come onto these webinars before will know I'm a branding expert, which is, is that classic thing about plumbers' homes, and I'd worked with many global brands who'd had big lawyers. So I came out of working for a very large company to set up on my own, to set up a little freelance consulting business. And at the beginning, this was before we set up MyTravelResearch, which is now my main business. I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to take that business, whether I just wanted it to be a business that gave me work or whether I wanted to grow it. So I didn't want to put my name on the business because that makes it much harder to sell and then move on and start another business if you want to do that. So I looked for a name for the company. I'm not going to share the name with you for legal reasons. I looked for another name and I thought long and hard about the name that I chose. And it was what I regarded as being, and this is interesting within the context of what Alyssa's just told you, as a descriptive name. It described a type of way of giving advice to people. And I looked around. Now, I did as much as checking who else might be using that name. I was familiar with a tour company who existed in this space, and I came across one other company who was a consultancy with this word in their name. I was actually curiously more worried about the travel company because most of my clients at the time were in the travel space. So I looked at them, but I thought, look, I don't do what they do. It's not really an issue. So it wasn't that I didn't do research, and it wasn't that I assumed my business name just because I was allowed to register it. I didn't assume that was all the story, but I looked at this other business and the type of consulting they did was very different from the type of consulting I was trying to do. So I looked at this and I thought, well, that's all right. We're very, very different. I'll be brutally honest, as a branding expert, I thought their brand assets were truly ugly. So I thought they're going to look very different. And I tweaked the wording. So I did not, they just used one word in the name of their company, and I put some other wording around it. So X Consulting and Strategy was what I called my business. And I set it up and I ran it. I created some very fun brand assets with some very clever designers in terms of the way that this looked was imaginative. It had very sound archetypal positioning, and I was running this business for just over a year. And we were getting very successful. Our Google rankings were climbing. And then in the week in which my mother-in-law died, because by the way, these things never actually go wrong when you've got lots of time to sort them out. They go wrong when things are difficult. I received a notice from a very large legal firm in another state in Australia, basically telling me that I'd infringed the trademark of this other consultancy. I didn't actually know Alyssa or any other trademark lawyers at the time, but looking at the name of the lawyers concerned, I got myself a big end of town law firm to do the initial advice. And also at the same time, I went off and did a bit more research of the kind that Alyssa's, I had to do this very painfully on my own rather than having an expert like Alyssa do this. I went off and looked at the IP Australia website and discovered that this particular company had trademarked every single category of where you could use this name other than the tour company way. So if you touched the idea of advice or consulting in any field, they had trademarked this name. The name sat on the borderline of that descriptive issue, which is why it's quite interesting. So by the time I then went in to see my very expensive big end of town lawyers to talk this through, they said, look, what do you want to do? We can make this go away, buy you enough time to do this. Oh, and by the way, my web designer, because they'd asked me to take down all my website assets while the case was settled, was backpacking for 6 weeks in South America. So I didn't actually know how to even comply. So they went in and said, look, we can buy you enough time and just make this go away. Or is there any level of negotiation you want to do here? And I sat down and said, well, look, this term is, I wouldn't say it's generic, and it was quite a unique term, but it describes a certain way of providing advice. Should they have been allowed to trademark this under this descriptive act? And my lawyer looked at me and said, here's the thing. She said, I think this is actually a very borderline case. And I think you could actually, push the boundaries of trademark law if you want to go down that path. But you'd be looking at $250,000 in costs potentially to do that. And if you lost, you'd have their costs on top of this, and that it's another big end of town. So you could be looking at potentially anywhere from $200,000 up to $1 million to fight the case, which if you're a single person business, I did say, can I think about it and buy a lottery ticket over the weekend? And if it does come in, I might spend $1 million on doing it because I felt quite passionately about the brand name. But otherwise, it then became, did I want to negotiate or did I want to just walk away? Now, I took a decision that enough of my brand was clearly different. There was no way that they could touch me under passing off. My brand assets were all very different. In looking at them, there was just one overlap, which is the use of one word in the name. So there was no case for them doing a passing off law on it. There was no misleading. There was no evidence that any clients had mistaken us. But my bad luck was the company in question had some very big end lawyers working for them, including some who'd worked for some of Australia's companies. Because again, you don't often trip over small businesses in this world. You quite often trip over businesses with large, deep pockets. I did take a decision to spend some more money trying to negotiate with them. That ultimately was not successful. The cost of negotiating to exit gracefully would have been about twice what it would have cost me to set up a fully validated trademark. It cost me about 4 to 5 times to have fought it and then lost it. And the interesting thing was, initially, as Bron said, I was quite distraught. You know, I'm a branding expert. This is my area of expertise. If I were advising a big client, I'd have made them go off and do all of this stuff. But then I spoke to a number of other small businesses, all of whom were in the same, but the point that Bron made, how were you able to register the name? Did it not say someone else has this name? Because I'd put those different words in, you know, ASIC sites did not consider that to be an issue. So that's a completely separate exercise, but a number of other businesses have done that. And because I've shared that story, Bron and I can point to at least 6 or 7 other businesses that went away and discovered that they were vulnerable to this situation. So the reason I tell this story is firstly to say, however clever you are, you think you are at these things, a trademark's still a good idea. And just to say, please, if you do go away and look at this, share your story with us so that we can help other people understand it. But I can honestly say it was a terribly traumatic experience. It was literally, I mean, these guys were threatening to sue me for every single thing that I had. They were threatening to haul me into court. They were not people who played nicely. And you know, even I shared my story with some of my old employer, which was a major global research company, and they said, we get these people all the time. We normally just look at it. We hardly ever say no. But luck doesn't follow you in these situations. Plan for things, don't rely on luck. So, Bron, is there anything else you think I could usefully say, or perhaps you might want to add to that, Alyssa, as a cautionary tale?
I think you've covered it, and you know, as not only Carolyn's business partner but also her friend, it was terrible. She was really put through the ringer, didn't see it coming, and cost her an enormous amount of money not to be sued. So I would suggest everybody go off and check if your business name or your business is trademarked, and then have a think about what you want to do from there. So obviously our business is trademarked. MyTravelResearch.com. It's one of the first things that we did. But yeah, like it just came from left field, and you know, both these things come from left field. They're so important to business, you know, and you just don't know when it's going to hit you. So I think that's pretty well it. Does anybody have any questions? So what I'll do now, we'll stop the recording so that we can